For 46 centuries, a single structure has stood on the scorched edge of the Sahara Desert, silently humiliating every generation of engineers that has followed. It has outlived every dynasty, every conquering army, every civilization that dared to call itself powerful. The Giza Plateau, a blistering, wind-savaged expanse of limestone bedrock baking under a merciless sun, was never meant to host anything permanent. This was a killing field of extremes. Temperatures swing from 115 degrees in the furnace of the afternoon to near freezing at night, cracking stone from the inside out. Sandstorms descend without warning, moving like walls of grinding glass, stripping exposed surfaces down to nothing. The geology itself is treacherous, a layer cake of soft, nummulitic limestone riddled with fractures, sitting atop ancient seabeds that shifted and settled unpredictably beneath any weight placed upon them. Civilizations before the pharaohs erected mud brick settlements on this plateau. They crumbled. They were swallowed by sand and forgotten within generations. The desert consumed them without effort, without memory. Logic dictates that nothing monumental should exist here. The calculated cost? Not just in treasure, but in crushed vertebrae, in ruptured tendons, in lives consumed by heat exhaustion and falling stone, was so catastrophically disproportionate to any conceivable benefit that even entertaining the idea should have been an act of institutional madness. You do not haul 6 million tons of rock across a desert. You do not carve 80-ton granite beams from quarries 500 miles upriver and float them to a construction site on wooden barges that the Nile could shatter on any given afternoon. You do not attempt to align a 13-acre foundation to true north with a margin of error smaller than 3 arc minutes, using nothing but the stars, string, and the naked human eye. The rational conclusion is absolute surrender. But driven by a fanatical, civilization-defining obsession with conquering death itself, a pharaoh named Khufu, ruler of the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, made a decision of staggering, almost hallucinatory arrogance. He looked at the pitiless desert, at the geological chaos beneath his feet, at the murderous climate that chewed through everything humanity had ever placed upon it, and he did not flinch. He commanded that the bedrock be leveled, that the largest, heaviest, most geometrically precise single structure the world had ever seen be ripped from the planet's crust and stacked, stone by agonizing stone, into a monument so impossibly massive that neither time nor nature could erase it from the face of the earth. This is the story of how a single pharaoh marshaled an entire civilization into a decades-long siege against the desert, poured the wealth of a kingdom into the sand, and erected the Great Pyramid of Giza, a structure so devastatingly over-engineered that 4,600 years later, humanity still cannot fully explain how it was done and cannot muster the will, the knowledge, or the societal machinery to do it again. To feel the true weight of this insanity, you must stand on the Giza Plateau as it existed around 2600 BC, stripped of every tourist, every road, every romantic illusion. What you would encounter is not a construction site. It is a geological furnace. The Sahara breathes like a living predator here, a vast, indifferent organism of searing heat and abrasive wind that treats exposed human skin like a material to be eroded. The limestone bedrock, pocked with ancient coral fossils from an era when this wasteland was an ocean floor, radiates heat upward in waves that distort vision and drain the body of moisture in hours. Water is a luxury hauled from the Nile. Shade does not exist. The rock underfoot is laced with fractures, soft bands of marl sandwiched between harder layers, creating a foundation that could buckle catastrophically under concentrated weight. And above it all, the grinding assault of the Khamsin, the seasonal sandstorm that scours flesh with microscopic shards of quartz traveling at gale force. This was not a hospitable platform. This was an open wound on the surface of the planet. Why then did they commit to this colossal act of geographic violence? Because Khufu did not build a tomb. He built a machine for eternal survival. In the theology of the Old Kingdom, the pharaoh was not merely a king. He was a living god, the singular nexus between the mortal world and the divine. His death did not end his reign. It transformed it. The pyramid was the vessel that would launch his spirit into the imperishable circumpolar stars, guaranteeing the cosmic order that kept the Nile flooding, the crops growing, the kingdom breathing. Failure was not an architectural shortcoming. It was the annihilation of civilization itself. Every bushel of grain taxed from the delta, every conscripted laborer pulled from the fields during the flood season, every copper chisel hammered into uselessness against the stone. All of it was justified by a single equation: build this monument or watch the cosmic order collapse. There was no alternative. The weapon forged to prosecute this war was not a single machine, but an entire logistical organism, operating at a scale that modern project managers struggle to model. The workforce, estimated at 20 to 30,000 organized laborers at peak operation, not whip-driven slaves, but skilled, state-fed, medically treated citizens rotating in 3-month shifts, functioned like a military division. They quarried the local nummulitic limestone from open pits hundreds of meters from the site, hacking blocks free with copper chisels and dolerite pounders, spheres of brutally hard, igneous rock used to pulverize grooves into the quarry face until slabs could be levered free. For the interior chambers, they needed something the desert could not provide: Aswan granite, a dense, crystalline, igneous rock quarried over 500 miles to the south. Blocks weighing between 25 and 80 tons were carved from the living bedrock, loaded onto massive wooden barges, and floated down the Nile during the annual flood when the river swelled into a temporary superhighway. Once ashore, laborers dragged the stones on wooden sledges across prepared trackways, pouring water onto the sand ahead, a technique so effective that modern physicists have confirmed it reduces pulling force by nearly 50%. Brute engineering executed with surgical coordination, the scale of what they assembled remains, even measured against modern megaprojects, almost incomprehensible. The finished pyramid consumed approximately 2.3 million individual stone blocks, with an average weight of 2.5 tons each. The total mass of the structure exceeds 5.9 million tons, heavier than every skyscraper in Manhattan combined. The base covers 13 acres of leveled bedrock, an area equivalent to 10 football fields, with each of the 4 sides measuring 756 feet and deviating from a perfect square by less than 8 inches across the entire span. The original height reached 481 feet, taller than a 40-story building, the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4 millennia. The interior king's chamber is lined with 9 granite slabs, some weighing over 80 tons, transported from Aswan and lifted more than 150 feet above ground level by methods still debated by structural engineers. Above the chamber, 5 separate relieving chambers were stacked to distribute the crushing weight of the millions of tons of stone pressing down from above. A feat of load-bearing intuition that anticipates modern structural engineering by 4,000 years. And the entire structure was sheathed in a blinding skin of polished Tura limestone casing stones, cut so precisely that the joints between them measured less than 1/50th of an inch, tighter than a human hair, creating a seamless, reflective surface that would have blazed like a white beacon visible from miles across the desert. The construction phase was an explosive, mythical demonstration of organized human fury. The quarries roared with the percussion of 10,000 dolerite hammers. The Nile swarmed with barges groaning under impossible loads. Ramps, whether external, internal, or spiraling, the exact configuration still unknown, climbed the growing structure like arteries feeding a colossal stone heart. For roughly 20 years, between 2580 and 2560 BC, the entire economic machinery of the Old Kingdom was harnessed to a single, overwhelming objective. A block was placed on average every 2 to 3 minutes during working hours, a logistical throughput that defies casual comprehension. There was a blinding, absolute certainty in the endeavor. The stone rose, the desert yielded, and for a shining, intoxicating moment, it appeared that humanity had performed the impossible. It had forced the most hostile landscape on the continent to accept a permanent scar. But the desert never truly surrendered. It merely waited. The human cost, long obscured by myth, has been excavated from the bones themselves. At the workers' cemetery near Hayt el Ghurab, archaeologists unearthed skeletons that read like case studies in structural violence, spines compressed and shattered from decades of lifting stones that exceeded their bodies' capacity to endure. Joints ground to powder, healed fractures, evidence that the state provided medical care, yes, but also evidence that these bodies were broken repeatedly and sent back to the quarries, limbs amputated, skulls fractured by falling debris. These were not slaves, and that makes the reality worse in some ways. These were citizens, honored and fed, who volunteered for a project that consumed their bodies like fuel. The desert heat killed silently through dehydration and heat stroke. Sandstorms blinded and buried. The quarry walls collapsed without warning. For every polished casing stone that gleamed in the sun, there was a body beneath the sand that would never be recorded. Jump to the present. The Great Pyramid stands, and the civilized world has reduced it to a postcard, a bucket list checkbox, a backdrop for tourist photographs. But the structure is deep into the 5th millennium of its existence, and the desert has never stopped fighting to reclaim it. The original Tura limestone casing, that blinding, seamless armor, was systematically stripped by medieval Cairene builders after a devastating earthquake in 1203 shook the stones loose. They carted the polished blocks away to construct mosques and fortresses, leaving the rough core exposed to the full fury of the elements for the first time in 3,000 years. Without its protective skin, the pyramid began to bleed. Wind erosion carves deeper into the exposed blocks every decade. Temperature fluctuations, the brutal daily swing between scorching heat and near-freezing nights, cause the limestone to expand and contract in a relentless cycle of thermal fatigue. Salt crystallization, driven by moisture wicking up from the rising water table, grows inside the pores of the stone like a slow-motion explosive, spalling the surface layer by layer. The water table beneath the plateau has risen dramatically, softened by agricultural runoff and sewage from the encroaching sprawl of Greater Cairo, threatening the very bedrock foundation that has held 6 million tons of stone for 46 centuries. Air pollution from the choking traffic of a city of 20 million attacks the limestone with sulfuric and nitric acid, and 14 million tourists per year trample the site, their breath condensing on interior chamber walls, triggering haloclasty, the growth of destructive salt crystals within the ancient stone. An invisible army of conservators and structural engineers fights an exhausting, underfunded war to slow the decay, patching fractures, managing drainage, and praying that the fragile equilibrium does not finally collapse. And here is the paradox that no tourist brochure will ever print. We live in an age of self-driving machinery, satellite-guided surveying, diamond-tipped cutting tools, and concrete that can be poured into any shape imaginable. We could, theoretically, stack a pyramid-shaped pile of stone on a desert floor. Engineers estimate the cost at $1 to $5 billion. We could finish it in under a decade with a fraction of the workforce. The technology is trivial. And yet, we cannot build another Great Pyramid. Not because we lack the cranes, because we lack everything else. We lack a civilization willing to funnel the economic output of an entire nation into a single structure for 2 decades, without interruption, without budget cuts, without shareholder revolts, without elections. We lack the institutional memory, multi-generational guilds of quarrymen and stone masons who spent lifetimes perfecting techniques passed from father to son, embedded not in blueprints, but in muscle memory, in calloused hands, in oral traditions that died when pyramid building ended. We lack the terrifying theological conviction that the cosmic order depends on this one building being finished. Modern civilization builds for profit, for quarterly returns. The Egyptians built for eternity, and they meant it with a ferocity that our spreadsheet-driven world cannot replicate. The Great Pyramid is not an engineering problem, it is a civilizational problem, and civilizations like that do not exist anymore. Monumental engineering, in its most extreme and ancient form, was never simply a contest of tools and materials. It was the full-spectrum mobilization of an entire society against the indifference of the natural world, a bet so total, so consuming, that the society itself was reshaped by the act of building. The pyramid did not just alter the plateau, it altered Egypt. And now, 46 centuries later, the plateau is quietly, patiently, grain by grain, attempting to return to what it was before a pharaoh decided that death itself could be defeated with limestone and sheer, magnificent stubbornness. Because sometimes, buried beneath 6 million tons of hand-cut stone, older than every empire that followed and more enduring than anything we have built since, there is a war that never ended. A war between the human refusal to accept impermanence, the desert's ancient and absolute indifference to that refusal, and the staggering bone-deep cost paid in shattered spines, in stripped casing stones, in rising water tables and crumbling facades, that accumulates silently and without mercy in the widening cracks between ambition and the earth.